I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I know. I get it. I get it. I'd rather be on the sidelines here
It's
than
always
the
good.
firing line.
Exactly. So I've
What are you
opened up the
drinking,
web-
Matt?
I'm drinking water. It's not even vodka disguised as water. It's just water.
That would be a mighty glass of vodka, I'll tell you.
I love that.
That would by the end of the hour, I would be doing a solo. Maybe not.
Maybe not. So I'm going to try and find Neal Griffin here on the participant. Hi, everybody who's come in with us. We're so glad that you're here at the webinar. We're going to be talking with James Patterson and Matt Eversmann in 1 second with Neal Griffin. And I'm going to...
if we can find Neal.
We're going to find Neal right now. And we're
calling Neal.
Calling Neal as a panelist. Let's see if we can get him up here with us, because we definitely want to have Neal in this conversation with us.
We only had a cop, we could find him.
Yeah, okay. Where's the cop when you need one? Exactly.
He's here with us. I just don't see him on the screen. So Neal, I don't know if you can turn on your
here we go. There we go.
Here he comes.
Hey,
oh,
what do you
perfect.
Know? Hey, I was a cop in 1989. Okay, this stuff is all like.
All right.
That's when I started. Hi guys, nice to meet you. Sorry about the delay.
Yeah, no problem. Perfect.
Yeah.
Good lighting too. I like that laugh in the background. That's a cool touch.
Oh, you caught me. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it. It's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Listen, I would have loved to sit with you all for chat, but you know, I'm really anxious to talk to you. And Julie, thanks so much for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is going to be another great conversation, another great book with James and Matt. They started this with Walking My Combat Boots. They've done one on nursing. They've done one. You did one on, I'm missing one.
We did ER nurses. This is the third one.
This is the third one. Okay.
And we're doing one, believe it or not, on the next one is going to be booksellers and librarians. Do you believe it? The title, which I think is kind of humorous, is The Secret Lives of Booksellers and Librarians.
Ooh.
And it's actually pretty good stories.
We might have a few secrets.
Yeah.
It's the things that happen behind the scenes.
The green room secrets.
The green room secrets, for sure. Sometimes I wish I had those on recording. I know you're not supposed to, but there's some good stuff that happens in the green rooms, let me tell you. Okay, everybody, I know you all want to get started and get this conversation going. So let me do my official intros here and the little bit of housekeeping that I have to do. For those of you that don't know, Warwick's is located in La Jolla, San Diego, California. My little sign there says 1896, been around for a long time. If you're in the San Diego area, we would love for you to come by and pick up your copy of Walk the Blue Line directly from us. But I'm going to be chatting with you in the comment section or the chat section there. So I'll let you know how to order that book from us and we can ship that to you wherever you are. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and pop your questions in there. Neal, I'm assuming that you would like me to come back on after you're done talking and bring those questions.
You know, based on my track record, I think that's a good idea.
I think that might be a good idea.
Yeah, you better come back in about 10 minutes, Julie.
I'll be back soon.
How old were you? I just out of curiosity, how old were you when you started the thing in 1896?
Let's see. I would have been, because of my years in, where's the gray hair?
No, you look, I know, it's unbelievable. You look like you're like 30, and that's okay. Yeah, we're going there. Okay.
Retin-A is great. Good face cream. So let me introduce these wonderful gentlemen to you. We all recognize James Patterson as the world's best-selling author. The creative Alex Cross, he has produced more enduring fictional heroes than any other novelist alive. Matt Eversmann, sorry, Matt, retired from the Army after 20 years of service. His first book with James Patterson was Walk in My Combat Boots, that we talked about earlier. And like I said, we're talking about Walk the Blue Line tonight with Neal Griffin. Neal is the LA Times bestselling author of Benefit of Doubt. After a stint in the Marines, he went into law enforcement and is currently Criminal Investigations Division Commander here in California. He is a graduate of the FBI's invitation-only National Academy Training Program and is a certified master instructor in law enforcement leadership and ethics, which is going to lead us to a great conversation. Neal, take it away. I'll see y'all in a little bit.
Thank you so much, Julie, and hello to everyone, and particularly Jim and Matt. I tell you, this is an honor. It's a pleasure. I'll just jump right in and just say I am just honored to be here, but I'm also honored to have had the opportunity to read an advanced copy of Walk the Blue Line. And I would sum up my reaction as a former police officer, recently retired, but I would just say that my reaction to this is, and as a crime writer, I've written a good bit of crime fiction. What I try and do is tell stories that will challenge people's assumptions about what they think they know or they assume they know about law enforcement. We all know there's about 200 million experts out there on police work. And I do that through making up stories. But I think what you all have done is put a collection of not stories, but real events together. They're told in an evocative and in sometimes a visceral way, first person, straight from the cops, in cop speak. And I really think, and we can talk about this in a moment, but I really think this has an opportunity, the ability, the bandwidth, if you will, to change the conversation. I'm really excited about this book. As a cop, I appreciate it. As a writer, I'm just as impressed as I can be. But here's my first question, and I'll just throw it out to both of you. It's, how did you do it? Because I know cops, and they're personable, and they're funny, and they're outgoing and gregarious. They're great communicators. But when it comes to this kind of stuff, they're also pretty standoffish, and they, might talk about it over a beer after work, or they might talk about it in the locker room. They might talk about it to their spouses. But how did you guys get them to open up about stories like this? And like I said,
just very quickly, I'm going to shoot this over to Matt in 2 seconds. But the reason that we got together initially when we did Walk in My Combat Boots, I had seen Matt do some interviews, military folks, and he got people talking. And it's same situation. And ER nurses, same thing. They don't want to talk about it, about what they do. And Matt is so good at relaxing people and getting them talking about and liking talking about it. But Matt, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about that?
No, Neal, and that point was made up, and it's, as you know, this group of people, they would actually say that up front. I don't usually talk about this, or more importantly, I don't know why you want to talk to me. I haven't had anything to do, but thanks to the good Lord, you kind of chat. I will say, I think the military bona fides helps, and talking about a gunfight, talking about, and I don't mean that to be so cavalier, but there's a common bond right there of service and about mission and cause. And I got to tell you, I found your peers and your colleagues kind of, once we start going, whichever thread it was on, they I think felt comfortable enough to share the happy, the sad, and everything. And as Jim has said a million times, everybody, all of us have at least one good story. Cops have, the thousands of good stories for each of us. The tough thing was trying to figure out which ones to put in this book.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
And the other little sideline of this same thing, Neal, is, yes, it is hard to get people talking about things that are difficult to talk about. But the other piece of it is, the only time that the media seems to want to go and talk to the police is if something goes wrong. And what we've heard a lot from people who have read the book now is somebody is finally out there telling our side of the story. And I've said this, it's not pro-cop, it's not anti-cop, it's just cop. Here it is. You read it, and this is the real deal. Make of it what you will.
Yeah, and you're right. It's real cop. It's not the cops live, this place or that, with the interesting camera angle or the juggling down the street. This, to me, it just came across as it just came across me, obviously very first person, and just very honest and forthright. And again, I just think it has a real opportunity to change a conversation that, at times, to me, and I know to some of my former colleagues, it just feels like at some point it's just losing all sense of reason.
Yes.
When you're talking about 700,000 men and women on 16,000 different agencies, and get this, the people who aren't aware of it, contacting 60 million citizens a year.
Yeah.
60 million citizens a year, and they're basically, I think cops feel a lot like they're being judged on about a half a dozen calls a year. Yeah. And anyway, that's another side issue. But
no, it's absolutely essential. It's so essential. And one of the tragedies here is we can't get on CNN, and I like CNN fine, but that's crazy. This should not be a political thing. I mean, we're going to talk about, we're not here to sell cops or not sell cops, but this is an honest thing. And, one of the things, and then this goes back to Walking My Combat Boots with Matt and I, and our mission was with that, and it's the same thing with this book, Walk the Blue Line. if you've been there, hopefully you'll say Eversmann and Patterson got it right. And if you're one of these people that sits there and goes like, I know what it is because I watched the tape of what happened in Memphis, you go, okay, I had no idea. I really didn't understand at all. And that's what you're talking about when you say change the conversation. Change the conversation really is, let's have a conversation.
Oh boy, yeah, let's do that. Well, it's interesting you bring up Memphis, and absolutely, that's a horrific event. And I'm glad it was captured. I'm glad it's being handled the way it is. But
Yeah.
that brings me to another point, and it's funny because as an academy instructor, probably close to 30 years ago, one thing we used to challenge the young cadets with is just imagine that you're always being filmed, and anything you say can be on the 6 o'clock news. And now, of course, what they're actually training the young cadets is you're always being filmed, and everything you say can wind up on the 6 o'clock news. And the officers that you were talking to, what's their feeling on something like that? That level of scrutiny, which no other profession could possibly stand up to. I don't know if everyone you want to deal with that. If they had any kind of feelings on that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Again, this it sort of bubbles up without asking. I never ask any of those like jam you up questions. But two things that come to mind, Neal, and maybe they resonate with you. First, big picture, without even bringing up, at some point in every conversation, we did 150. Every single one of them would at some point say, and that Derek Chauvin was so bad. Like that was such bad policing. And
oh my gosh, don't even get me started.
In whatever tangential conversation it was, guys would say like, and gals would say like that was just bad policing. And it would follow up though, there would always be that eventual conversation of, man, we're pushing a rock up the hill here. And, I go out and I'm trying to solve a murder in the streets and people are taking, literally have their cell phones out filming me instead of helping. He's like, the guy who shot this kid is probably standing in the crowd too. So somewhere in there is the answer, but I got this sense of just such frustration, not over accountability and responsibility, but frustration over like, look, man, I'm doing my best. I'm not getting any help in the community.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about, and you know this already, Neal, and police officers know it is how impossible the job is. And one of the things that people who read this book, especially people who are very critical, you read this book, and if you're being honest with yourself, you go, wow, this is a really, really, really hard job. Matt was the actual, that movie, Black Hawk Down, Matt was the actual sergeant portrayed in that. So he's been there. And Matt, I mean, when you talk about how you feel about being a police officer, I mean, you've told me about that, but you can tell these folks.
Yeah, listen, I mean, there's that group of people that like to talk about everything that's also cool and sexy to go out and, do whatever it is. But at the end of the day, man, nobody likes to get shot at. Nobody likes to be alone at 2 o'clock in the morning going to answer that call. And Neal, you're nodding your head. I know you've probably done it more times than you've forgotten. It's a tough one. And yet, at the core of it, these men and women, as you know, are service-driven, mission-driven, community-oriented. And listen, yeah, they like some adventure. People join for a sense of purpose. But, I know that once they got on the job, guys and gals, like, I just want to get home at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I do, coming back to this issue of the cameras of always being filmed, which has been the watershed. When my career started with the grainy images of Rodney King, and that was a huge moment in law enforcement history. But here we are now with the Derek Chauvin situation, with the Eric Gardner situation, all of these horrible things to watch. I mean, and I know I've heard you all speak before and talk about the fact, and it's absolutely true. Nobody is more frustrated by bad cops than good cops, obviously, and that is industry wide. I can guarantee you that. But I guess I would ask you this: is in talking with all these police officers, I think right now there is a real challenge between the community and the cop relationship. It is what it is. Perhaps it is being defined by social media. Perhaps we should all be smarter than that, than to be dragged into those sorts of situations in terms of looking at one isolated incident. But are you detecting any sort of cynicism on the part of police? And the reason I bring that up is my understanding is recruiting's never been more difficult. they're really having a hard time finding young men and women who are interested in law enforcement. Where 300 used to line up for a single job, they might get a dozen. Are you picking up on, did you pick up on any kind of like the job isn't what it used to be?
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Tell me about that, Jim.
No, go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah, listen, that's another one of those across the board. Hey, I love this job, but I hope my kids don't do it. And there's a lot of people in the family business and in this profession, and it's it's a heartbreaker here, for me to hear, a third generation, policeman say, I don't want him to do it. One of the stories in our book, is a gentleman named Mike Salone, who maybe you're familiar with, but he's in Seattle, and he's also in the, head of the union, which was a tough one for me to quite figure out. But the numbers, I couldn't do justice of the mass exodus of policemen and women out of Seattle, the Seattle Police Department. You're like, literally, what are they going to do when somebody calls? And we all saw the news here. That's just one example. It's across the board.
When I was younger, back in the days of Vietnam, there was a lot of negativity about the military, and that's changed somewhat. It's evened out more. There's a more positive, in general. It's still not perfect, but it's much better. And back in those days, police had a better reputation. That it's just got to change. This whole thing of people always say, well, that's their job. No, it's nobody's job to have somebody spit in their face. It's nobody's job to have somebody throw rocks at your car. It's nobody's job to, and they're going to be mistakes. We did a ride along with the sheriff down here, and he said there had been over 1 million calls that year to the police that year in that county. And if you do that, there's going to be some mistakes. And this thing about, you're not a bad cop because you made a mistake once or you had a bad day. Yes, you're a bad cop if you do what happened in Memphis, but there's going to be things that are going to happen. Tempers are going to boil over. It's just, somebody, I defy anybody who that walks in and somebody spits in their face. That's not good. That's going to get somebody pissed off.
I'm glad to hear Jim and Matt. I assume you two, you probably had an opportunity to ride along as well. I would imagine they probably invited you into the car.
Yeah. I've done several, and because we do the Alice Cross and whatever. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I can tell you that that to me, if you get the right officer, is one of the most eye-opening experiences for a citizen. And also, you probably are familiar with the FATS machine, the firearm training simulator.
Oh, absolutely, man. Yeah, the sheriff talked about that.
Yeah.
Anybody who does that, they go, oh, wow, 2 seconds to make that life and death decision, 3 seconds. Right. No, and suddenly they get it.
Yeah. It was always fun to invite the either the media or local politicians in to do the FATS training.
Oh man, you should get them all in. All of them should do that, because if you're going to write about shit, you should understand it a little bit. Come on, you're out there, and I told Matt, after we did the military thing, I sort of arrogantly said, I kind of understand things now. And then it dawned on me at a certain point, I have never been shot at, and I've never shot at another human being. I don't understand it. I understand it better than I did, but I don't understand it. And people running around saying, I get it. You don't get it. Oh, I watched that video. No, you don't get it. You don't understand it. And how can we talk about it? How can we change it if people don't understand it? And if the media is out there banging on cops, and then they go, and we need to get better people in who want to be cops, as you're setting up this situation that's awful. Why would anybody watch that show and then go, oh, you know what, I want to be a cop? That's ridiculous.
Matt, I wonder, did you have a lot of, when you were interviewing these officers, you said there was a strong bond. Is there a sense of empathy? I mean, kind of compared stories in terms of the stress of the things Jim's talking about, that firsthand experience?
Yeah, no, and Neal, it is, I just say you ought to see Jim on the ride along. He carries a shield. They put him up at the breach. He does it. I get in the back. But I say that for a little levity, just to get started. No, it is. And what's interesting, really quickly, from our walk into combat boots, talking to service, veterans, then ER nurses, talking to guys and gals, literally in the ER, and then with law enforcement officers, there's that DNA. There's a very common bond in DNA. and you just sort of, we smell each other out.
There
And
you
so
go.
you can, and it sort of gets back to your opening question. It's like you know, maybe if nothing else, not to be such a jackass, but, you know, not to ask a Dumbo question, you know, like, you know, like you probably get asked a lot, you know, so you can kind of slide right in though, and talk more emotionally about, man, that was a bad call that you just described. And one of these stories that comes to mind really quick is, again, the ubiquitous 2 a.m. outside on the landing, and you can hear the yelling and screaming husband-wife fight going on inside, and the wife comes out running down the stairs, and literally this officer, and he's telling me this story, I mean, I captured in the book, he's like, I'm not sure literally whether I should shoot her or hug her as she comes down. And he told it so brilliantly, and you think, I'm sure I would have failed. I would have failed, and I've, you know, and again, not to beat myself on the chest, you know, I've been in a couple of scrapes that really, where it really counted, and you hope you do the right thing. Those are, you know, sharing those, I take my hat off to all, and it's every moment, every day, every call from Boston to San Diego and every place in between, you know, they're at risk.
And you know, one of the things, I mean, I don't want people to get the wrong idea, because this isn't like a homework assignment. It's a very, very readable book.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And we take, you know, Matt will do most of the interviews, and they're 50, 60 pages. And then we take them and turn them into these 5 or 6 pages where you'll get a sense of that officer, that detective, that DEA person, FBI, whatever, and a few of their stories. And so it does, and I mean, we didn't set out to do it this way, but there's more action in this book than there are in 4 Alex Cross novels, which is strange. And that wasn't our plan, but it did happen that way.
Readable would probably be the first word I would use to describe it. Extremely readable, and you can pick it up, and you could just, if you want to thumb through it. I started thumbing through it, but then I read every story, and evocative would be the word that would come to mind. And I think for a lot of people, eye-opening would be what comes to mind. Now, what's interesting, and you touched on this, Jim, is this editorial process, because I know cops are great storytellers in their own environments with their own limitations, and they're also
some aren't.
And they're pretty good writers. But I know there's some editing going on here, because there's not an F-bomb in the entire book. So I know that he probably did some editing, because I know cops and I know how they like to communicate. But how did that work? You said you did about 150 interviews. You probably, I don't think there's 150 stories. So what was the editorial process?
50
I'm just curious.
Well, part of it is some of it there were too similar from one to the other, so that was part of the process. Some people, no, they're not all good storytellers. Some I think weren't forthcoming. We certainly didn't throw anybody out because they were too provocative. You're right about the F-bombs. Only because for a lot of people that need to hear this, it just so turns a certain group of people off. You just don't want to turn them off that way.
Yeah, got it.
So, and I have the same issue with some of the, you know, in general, Alex Cross, he curses more than I let him do a little bit. But that is correct. Yeah, it's you know.
I kind of like to give people a taste of some of the stories, and maybe you guys can, if you had ones that were particularly impacting for you. But the one that I guess it struck me, because it felt so familiar, was and she ended up being identified as a young woman police officer, Jackie, and she works in the Southwest. And I did notice, and maybe we can touch on this, some officers were comfortable being completely identified, and other officers, you know, apparently preferred not to. But what Jackie had to say was just really interesting to me, because she talked about handling a call where a man was wielding a machete in the parking lot of a 24-hour joint, and how she was fired up for that call. And then she got there because other officers were there, because there was good communication, because there was good tactics. I think she described it that he went smooth and easy into handcuffs. And I would challenge anybody who's handled a person wielding a machete before, but that call went smooth and easy. But then another call she went on, which basically amounted to a trespassing son. She wound up in a fight for her life, and ended up even having to discharge her weapon, and was nearly killed. And that really struck me as, that is police work in a nutshell. You think it's not only 0 to 60, sometimes it's 60 to 0, and you just never know where it's going to land. And that story, and to me, it was told in a way that I think a lot of people are going to have to close the book at that point and say, I really never thought about it like that.
Yeah. I mean, there are some, I mean, this one, not so much like it's an everyday thing, but the one relatively new detective and went on a little bit of a drug bust, and it didn't seem like it was going to be that hairy. And she walked toward the garage, and these two guys opened up on her, and she wound up killing both of them, and she got shot 10 times.
Yes.
And she's like, there was another guy who said,
and came back to work, right, Jim?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
How about you, Matt? Was there any particular ones?
Well, I was. It's funny you say, and I told Jim the other day. I think sometimes the wind changes direction, and I have a new favorite, depending on what it is. Jackie was a great one, and she was an awesome interviewer. And not to recap the whole story, but when people read her story, and they'll realize, she was this close to curtains, and persevered, got back up, dusted herself off, and here she's still big.
Yeah.
To me, the one that's been laying on my shoulders for the last 24 hours, believe it or not, is a retired cold case homicide detective named Bill Springer, and he's down here in Florida. But he did cold case homicides for 30 years. And he's in the papers here frequently. Now that I know what to look for, he's in frequently here. And to land a plane, Neal, he's been working on one particular case for over 30 years. I mean, he's come back out of retirement to still work on just this one case. Interestingly enough, solving others along the way. And you think the perseverance, the dedication, he's meticulous, as you would know better than I, about the kind of man or woman that does that kind of investigation. But I just woke up the other day thinking, like, man, that I don't have the drive, and something brings him back to do this. And I just think that it's spectacular. That particular, they're all great, but tomorrow
you also get some. I mean, you don't get as many as you should, but some of these very positive things, like this one guy, and he says whenever he goes into this coffee shop in his SWAT gear, and the baristas come out and give him a hug, and there needs to be more of that kind of thing. Or there was one guy who he did a lot of work with this woman who was an addict, and years later. She met up with him, and she said, you may not have realized it, but all that talking to you, which might have seemed hopeless at the time, I'm graduating from college, and she invited him to her college graduation. So you get some of that too, and there should be more of that. Yeah. And it's interesting. Some neighborhoods have figured it out where the balance is okay. They're getting it. They understand why the cops are there. The cops understand the neighborhood. Some small towns, they get it. And some places they don't get it at all. I don't think we interviewed anybody from Memphis, but we did hear about Memphis a lot, talking to cops from the South and saying it's just a very, 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 very tough place. Yeah. Very tough to live in certain areas, and very tough for cops.
Yeah, but not to talk too much about this. Obviously, I would say this about the book: it stays in your head once you've read it, and I don't think it's about being a former cop reading it. I think it's about being a citizen, about being somebody that's in tune with what's going on right now in police community relations. Reading these stories, it's almost like that other part of the equation that we just haven't drilled down on. And I wrote a quote down because it did touch me to listen to this man who was dealing with the suicide in a family, and came in and saw what a lot of people untrained or that didn't have his experiences would have seen as a threat: a man with a gun and a person in a bed who was deceased. And he recognized that it was a suicide. And he had some information, but he recognized a suicide, and he remained calm. And he knew that, he said, I knew the guy wasn't a threat. And how many people are able to do that intuitively? Say, the guy sitting there with a gun, and just because there's a body over there, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to be. But in the end, he said, because he thought he dealt with it too coldly, and he's quoted, he says, I'm ashamed of my lack of compassion and empathy. And I just thought, man, I'd like to talk to him, because he couldn't handle that call any better. he couldn't have handled it more compassionately.
When there's so much there, just in terms of, once again, the things that people see, the things that a lot of officers see. There was one quote from one of the officers that he could count on one hand the number of homes he's entered that are filled with love. And this one has to do with bad calls and whatever. And just walking into home after home after home where it's like, there's not love here. There's, you know, it's tragic situation, and seeing that on a daily basis. And that has a big effect. I mean, one of the things, just in terms of reform, which most police believe in, they believe in changing things and making things better. And a piece of that is to move away a little bit from the kind of super macho thing of like, oh, I'm tough. You know, they've figured it out with, as Matt knows, with veterans, a little bit about the PTSD and the effect that it has. And that has not spilled over into cops as much as it needs to.
Yeah,
that's a real thing, man. And if you think it through, and if you read this book, you go, yep, get it. People need rest. People they need help. They need to be able to express that and not be ashamed of it or afraid of it. But things like that, you know, and that's changed for the good. And that's a little piece of why people get burned out and why cynicism creeps in.
And Matt, you know, there's a lot of conversation about that right now. Is the police model become too militaristic? And as an Army veteran, a combat veteran, and I've read the Battle of Mogadishu, and it's a terrific anthology. And once again, it's just real gut-wrenching type of stories. But in your experience with all these police officers, what do you think of that relationship or the militarization of police work, as they say? Are you seeing that as overblown, or is that an issue that we need to be concerned about?
So that brilliant question. And my wife has heard me talk about this a million times, and she's telling me to shut up. You know, I tend to think we're not quite sure, we as a country aren't quite sure what we want to do with our policemen and women. You know, remember back when we were given all the vehicles and all the surplus gear from Iraq and Afghanistan, and all these cops were driving around with MRAPs and all that kind of stuff. Me personally, I'm like, that's good. That sends a signal to the bad guys. But I appreciate now that maybe it gets, or it can be a little too intimidating for our community. So I'm not the greatest one to ask, because, you know, where I go, I'm like, hey, I want bad guys to run in fear when they see the men and women in blue. However, I think that you know, what spills out of it all is that, you know, cops have to do direct action, if you will, for using military terms. They have to be prepared to do a direct action mission. And they've also got to be able to switch gears, literally, like you said, 0 to 60, 60 to 0. They got to be able to switch gears on the next call and help. And we talk about this in this book, you know, literally a grandmother with dementia that somehow got out of the house in a snowstorm. And you know, the guy's like, I think I know that neighborhood. Let me go have a check and literally find her. And it sounds cliche. It sounds like it's out of central casting, but it's not. So we got, you know, a Delta Zeppelin going on here with what we want our policemen and women to do. I'm sorry, I'm all over.
Well, and Matt, there also is you have the issue. There's a big difference between here's the Taliban and they're shooting at us and whatever, and here's a neighborhood, and just because somebody's got dreadlocks, it doesn't mean they're the bad guy, and that's a big difference and important.
Well, one that struck, whether you mentioned that, Jim, and one of that struck very close to me because I saw it more than once, but the situation, I don't remember the young boy's name or even the officer. And this is why I want to bring it back to another issue, but the young boy that was shot because he was literally caught in the crossfire. And I think his age was 10 or 12 years old. And the police officer told one of you that story. And I just know those calls are probably the worst ones, where you're going into a situation, and it wasn't cop jumping to some conclusion. It wasn't some cop that pointed his gun at the wrong person. It was a young boy, in this case, literally caught in the crossfire in a home he was visiting, and he becomes basically a statistic. And it kind of leads me to the issue we talk about in terms of you know, the cops and the rah-rah stuff. What I really noticed about the officers that I guess I will just say made the final cut for your book, I saw a lot of emotional intelligence. You know, I saw a lot of them that were some that were literally being eaten up by the empathy And that can be a real drag in police work when you become so empathetic that you're taking it to call and day to day. You know, there's compassion, but then there's this ownership of empathy. And what I saw though in these stories is people that were able to, the young man who was a SWAT cop, cornered with a shield, guys pointing a gun at him, and he did what he had to do. He shot back. And then he was immediately brought up on some sort of a media blast about this was some sort of racially motivated shooting. And my recollection is he was Latino. So, but the way he even told you that story, I was really impressed with the way he was able to process that whole situation. So I think you really just have a terrific selection here of officers who really have been tested. They've been to the wall, and you know, they've held up.
There's some similarities to the ER nurses, believe it or not, just in terms of the amount of stress and the daily stress. Will you talk a little bit about it? Just goes on and on and on, Matt. How do you describe that?
Yeah, you know, this idea that you know, from the time they start the job until they retire, they're deployed. You know, like the day in, day out. That's soldiers get the luxury of coming back and training, refit, and reorganize. But these men and women, both the nurse, the ER nurses, and these law enforcement officers, you know, Neal, you know, you're on the clock the whole time. And what you just alluded to a minute ago about, you know, this overwhelming empathy, that happens, and I think to their detriment sometimes. I mean, guy says, I don't remember my daughter's wedding because I was working on a case, and you know, like that kind of stuff. It's a challenge. Listen, we got to figure it out because they're also, it puts them at great risk too.
Well, I guess, and before we start taking any questions, and I know Julie's monitoring, but I do feel like, and I think I can speak for cops, and you all mentioned it, that they just assume that they love the job, but maybe they don't want their kids to go into it. I've heard some of them say, you know, they're willing to do the work, but it isn't what it used to be, that kind of thing. And I just wonder, how do we change that conversation? And I would say to the audience and to everyone that a little over 24 hours ago, a young man by the name of, I think his last name was Jerving, was shot to death and killed in Milwaukee Police Department. And he is the 5th officer so far in 2023 to have been murdered, have been shot to death. And their names aren't floating around in every household. And I just wonder, how do we change the conversation away from clearly the people that are police officers that should never have been police officers? What I've seen in Memphis is just gut-wrenching. Derek Chauvin was literally the worst police work, probably the worst police work I've ever seen captured on videotape in my life. But how do we change the conversation away from those isolated calls and get us all talking about what really will make?
No, you're 100% right, and it's just balancing the equation so people understand. So there's it, but you I don't know. You just get these news organizations that what are they thinking? It just makes no sense. It's just I don't know. The world is going that way. You know, Republican, Democrat. You know, it's insane. It doesn't seem like you know. He got Smirkanish. I think he's seeing whatever the hell he is, but he's stuck in the middle. I'm stuck in the middle, man. That means you're seeing both sides. I mean, that's whether you like Bill Clinton or not. And I've done books with him. He sees both sides. He always did. And if we have people on the news and they don't see both, you got to see both sides. You got to, exactly right. A cop gets shot, to say his name. Yeah, this is a bad thing. This is terrible. Does it equate with what happened in Memphis? I don't know. I don't care, but whatever. But they're both tragedies, and let's talk about it. And that's where the balance and that's where the understanding comes. You need to understand what's going on with cops, and people don't for the most part.
What do you think about that, Matt? Can you appreciate? I mean, it's interesting how high the reputation. I know my own world. The reputation of veterans and the reputation of our soldiers and our Marines and airmen, all of them is sky high. But it's funny, you know, who's really taking hits these days are cops and teachers, and I can't think of more dedicated professions. I really can't.
No, you know, Neal, honestly, and it's one of the noble professions, without a doubt. And you know, Jim and I have talked about this ad nauseum. You know, how did it get to be this way? And nobody's being tone deaf. Like there's not a need to to make it better. I mean, we all want, when you were in the Marines, they wanted to make it better. When you're a cop, you want to make it better. You want to be the best of the best. I think, I hate to say it, I think media clearly has a big part of it.
And listen, I'm a lefty, but you know, we're not going to get on CNN. We're not going to get on MSNBC, and the New York Times is not going to review this book. And that's bullshit.
Wow.
That's just crap. And the LA Times is not going to review it. And that's nuts. Why, you know, read the damn thing. They think it's going to be some boring piece of whatever, and they don't realize it's actually going to be enlightening. And it's just messed up. And it's not about selling the book. It's just about, as you say, this is the kind of thing that begins to tilt things in a way that makes sense. But which is two sides talking to one another and understanding. And we need to understand the neighborhoods better, and we definitely need to understand police work better.
I throw this challenge out there. Anybody that's talked either now, they're not talking about it so much, but in the last 6 months to a year, anybody that tinkered with the idea of quote unquote defunding the police, I would say, okay, read this book and then let's have a conversation about that.
Yeah, no, it needs to be, PTSD needs to be dealt with. Time off needs to be dealt with. Better training, retraining needs to be dealt with. There's so many things. They need more money. If you really want a terrific police force, and neighborhoods, you know, you pull people in and go, no, we don't want that. We want the cops in here. You know, sometimes we want better cops. They don't want Scorpion, but you know,
I think one of the real difficulties right now is you talk about recruiting, and the smaller your pool gets, the less qualified candidates you're going to get. So there's kind of this I guess yin and yang that's coming out of this is, okay, well, we've made the profession so unpopular that we're not going to be able to hire the people that we might have been able to hire 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think I don't want to bash on the young people that are joining academies. I'm sure they're all very committed, but the bigger our pool is for candidates, the better. And this conversation is definitely, I think, from what my friends have told me, is having an impact on the ability to recruit qualified applicants. Yeah.
Well, we saw that in the military. I mean, you know, in the mid 2000s, you know, I'm sure it was across the board, all the services we needed more people. You know, you can't have 150,000 people on the surge if you don't have 150,000 troops. Standards changed, and it's demonstrable. But you know, we've got to change it, and I do hope that you know, the people, those that are willing to read this book, you know, at least then they can say, I understand it a little better. You know, we didn't make this stuff up. This isn't Jim Patterson, you know, making it up, you know, in his office. This is right, you know, from their lips to your ears, and you know, read it, and it's you can't. It's unmistakable. It's as truthful as it can get.
Right. Well, I'll just tell you right now, and I'll attest to that. I know cop speak when I hear it, and this is cop speak. This isn't dressed up. This isn't tight dialogue, you know, to move the story forward. This is cops telling the story. So I see Julie's on the screen. I'm just going to say, I don't mean to sound like an apologist for the police, because I'm not. I do think that there are a lot of things that need to change about law enforcement, but I also know that of the 700,000 that are out there, 99.some% are doing the job in a very positive way, and we've got to get back to that conversation. And again, I really appreciate the book you all have put together, and I hope it gets in a lot of hands. And I really do think it has the potential to change the conversation in this country. So thank you.
Thank you, Neal.
Awesome. Thanks, Neal.
Julie, what do you want?
I know, I'm just such a nag, aren't I? Just coming in, breaking up the party here. This is actually for all of you. Neal, you included, if you want to pipe in on this one. What about the narrative that's out there about how police officers are supposed to recognize mental health issues? Did that come up in conversations that you had, Matt? I see you nodding your head, Matt.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is one of those, I was nodding my head because I want to hear what Neal has to say, but from our interview side, it came up a lot. If not every single one, almost everyone, whether they were talking about a police officer and their need for mental wellness and mental health, you know, kind of recalibrating and getting squared away, like Jim talked about with PTSD, but also in our communities. You know, we're talking about you know, and Neal referenced them, you know, these events that happen, you know, there's a screw loose with people that are doing such evil things. I mean, so mental health is and believe it or not, teachers are talking about it too. So, you know, this idea of mental health across the spectrum is far greater a need than I certainly, you know, had any idea of. I mean, Neal, I'd be just curious what you say about that from a guy that had boots on the ground.
Well, the frontline response to mental health issues in this country it's not medical, it's not psychiatric, it's cops, boots on the ground. They're the ones handling it, bottom line. And the best way that I saw it being handled came out of LAPD about 10 years ago, and you guys might be familiar with it, is the psychiatric emergency response teams. That would be one cop and one clinician who's pretty well trained in issues of mental health. And they would literally go out and problem solve with people that are frequent flyers with mental health issues. And they'd also respond to immediate mental health issues. Made all the difference in the world to have that person in the car.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I don't know why don't best practices, why doesn't it get spread around more? That's always been a crazy thing about the world, that not invented here, you know.
It's got to be a money issue.
Part of it is, and part of it is just craziness of people. Not invented here. We didn't think, you know, we're smart. Right. We know how to do this thing, and people are nuts that way. You know.
Yeah. So Leslie has a question here, and she says, if it's inappropriate, I said, they'll say there's really nothing. I don't think
you come to the right place or inappropriate.
Exactly. So it seems that the police departments have an HR problem, she says. Why are we hearing that as a problem? Fix the pipeline. While training is necessary, it isn't going to address the cops who should have never been hired. Any comments?
I'll jump in. I would jump in, and you know, this is one of those, I thought about it too late the other day. I'm sure that there's plenty of HR people in law enforcement that probably should find another job. There's no doubt about that. I mean, bureaucracies happen from hospitals, as you can imagine, to municipalities, to banks. It never happened. Like, it's everywhere. And I think that's probably a very, very legitimate observation about, you know, bad HR people, you know, aren't doing the job. I will tell you just a quick anecdote. What was interesting to me as we were canvassing the country looking for policemen and women to talk to, if I talk to a cop or I talk to a chief, because everybody's got to get, you know, a blessing from above, they all said yes. They're like, we'd love to tell our story. If I talk to the public affairs, and I wrote like every public affairs all over the country, before I even hit enter, they would say no, you know, and not to beat up on them, but part of that bureaucracy. So I would just add that that's probably a fair guess, but I would defer to Neal. You know, he's got the real world view on that system.
Well, I'll say, I guess my standard line on this is that's true. There are men and women in law enforcement that need to find a new career. But I'll tell you this, as one of my last assignments as an investigations commander was to review videotape, all videotape. And the first thing it was pretty routine and often boring. A lot of police work is pretty routine. It was often very comical. I bet you guys came across that. Some pretty funny stories about the things that happen in police. It was often heroic. No doubt about it. Just some amazing police work. Sometimes there were training issues for sure. And sometimes there were competency issues. But what I personally never saw one time was malicious violence committed by a police officer. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But in my career, I literally never saw one case where I would call it abusive force that was unnecessary force, borderline malicious, and that person was fired. But it is rare. But yes, there are of the 700,000 cops, there are some that need to be moved along. And I'll say this, I'll say right up, police unions can be their own worst enemies sometimes. I'll leave it at that. But the police unions can really be in a position where they end up defending some people where they should be encouraging them to move along. I don't know if you felt that way, Jim, and all the interactions you've had with different cops.
Yeah, I know. I think that's fair also. And Matt, in the military, I think they're a little better at weeding out the bad ones faster.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. They don't have unions.
Exactly.
All right. So Pam just wanted to make a comment. She said her husband's a cop and she thinks you all are amazing. So thank you, Pam, for that comment.
Thank you, Pam.
Yep. So Fran's here from Boston. She says hi. She's on her call with her mom, Teresa, and they're near Wisconsin. She's wondering if there was something specific that inspired you to write this specific book, Jim and Matt.
I think it's what we've been talking about from the get-go here, which is with combat boots and ER nurses, and now this one, and then we're going to do teachers. It's where we think people think they understand something, but they really don't. And we felt that that we could get that story out there, and evolving to this way of telling the story where we would have these 40 or 50 page interviews, which would be really boring to read. You just don't want to read a 500 page book with 10 interviews, or, you know, to this thing where we condense it all into these very readable. So you can really, it's almost like if, you know, come to this motel and you're going to talk to 50 cops in the weekend, and you're going to understand at the end of the weekend, it's going to be really interesting and fun, and we'll have a few drinks, but you're really going to learn a lot. But that's what so at the end of it, you just go, I understand it so much better than I did. And that's what we wanted. That's what and that's why I've said it before. I don't write important books. Doesn't matter whether it's entertaining. Alice Quest is entertaining, whatever. It's not realism, certainly. But this stuff I think is important.
And you already answered. Renee had the question about teaching, and so
you knew it. I sort of had that.
You had that sense that was coming.
Yeah.
You were channeling Renee. So you are going to write, because there does seem to be a war against public education right now too. And
it's very hard for people. Absolutely. Yes, it's hard. Yeah, it's coming at them from all sides. And my mother was a teacher for 60 years, so I'm definitely into that one. When
do you think that one will be? Are you doing those interviews now?
We're starting, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that seems to be it for our questions from the audience. Neal, not sure if you have one final that you wanted to ask?
Put this out on online. They're going to love this. If you shake them up, wake them up, shake them up and wake them up.
Yeah.
Put a good headline on there. Free sex.
No, not to be redundant, but you know, I guess I would just say, I don't know what I was expecting. Julie, thank you so much for the opportunity. Matt, like I said, I've delved into Battle of Mogadishu. Jim, I love your writing. I love your masterclass. When I really need to get zeroed in, I go to Jim's masterclass, whether it's on outlining or character development or whatever. So you two have a lot of credit in my book, but I think this book was just what my experience with it was cathartic and empathetic, but also appreciative of what I know. I'm going to put this book in a lot of people's hands, and I really look forward to having talks with some people who have, you know, because I'm with you, Jim. I run in a left-leaning kind of world, and I really do, and I have a lot of people who are just really down on cops right now. I'm anxious to share this book with them.
Matt, any final words?
Yeah, well, Neal, I would just say thank you for making the time. I know
Neal, this is great.
Put you in an arm bar, but most importantly, thanks for all you've done and continue to do. And you know, the Marine Corps notwithstanding, like Army guys, we begrudgingly have to say, my brother's a Marine, so but for your service, thank you, and thanks for a great night. And
that was fun.
I hope we answered it. I hope I didn't make too much of a Dumbo out of myself.
James, you want to take us out? Any final words, Jim?
No, I think we've all said it, and now that the thing is, you got the tape, so let's try to get some people to see it.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you. It was really an enlightening and wonderful conversation, and I appreciate all of your time. Everybody, Walk the Blue Line. Please buy it. Hopefully buy it from Warwick's, but buy it from somebody. So with that,
pass the word on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Warwick's. It's nice to be there again. Thank you. Thank you, man. Thank you, Neal. That was really good. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Appreciate it. It was fun.
Bye-bye.